Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. You find me back at base again. I've been away in South Africa, in the Cape Town area, over the turn of the year, looking at some cars over there and looking at some projects and things like that. More of that to come later, but we're now back at base and we're very Lamborghini heavy, this video. Some people would say that's a good thing, some people would say not. But it's just the way the chips fall. It's as projects come in, as jobs come in, things like that. So this particular car here is a very interesting car. It's one of the very first Lamborghinis ever built. It's chassis number 109. There was the original pre-production prototype, which was called the 350GT, which was the very first car that was styled slightly unsuccessfully by a chap called Franco Scaglione. And then chassis number 101, 102, 103 and 104 were cars that were built in Ferruccio's new purpose-built factory, but they sort of went to very, very carefully selected friends of his for evaluation and for them to sort of not be released into the big wide world. And so 1, 2, 3 and 4 were sort of pre-production prototypes. And 105, by common folklore, was the very first production Lamborghini. This is 109, which makes it essentially the 5th production Lamborghini ever built. Very, very interesting car, and there are some special things about these cars, which I'll come on to in a moment. The very first car, the 350GT, was so raw and so unfinished that it didn't even have an engine in. When it was presented by Ferruccio at his very first motor show outing with his own stand, there was the 350GT on the stand and his very first Lamborghini 3.5 litre V12 engine next to it. But what people didn't know was there was no engine in the car. He was actually using sandbags to weigh down the front of the car to make it look like the car had an engine in. And when people said, can we have a look at the engine, he would simply say, oh, I'm sorry, the bonnet catch is a bit faulty on this car. So there we go. Things did move on. This is actually very much a working car. The first 120 350GTs were built out of aluminium. The bodywork was built out of sheet alloy instead of steel, which is much lighter. But it was built under the system called the Superleggera system, which was patented by a company called Touring of Milan. And in fact, Touring of Milan were responsible for turning this car, the original rather raw 350GT, into a credible grand touring car. So this is an immensely important car for Italian car history in the 1960s, because not only did this sort of establish Lamborghini as a manufacturer, but it also it sent shockwaves through the rest of the industry. So Ferrari, for example, suddenly found he had a rival a few kilometers down the road, Modena and Bologna being very close to each other. But he was sort of, here he was with this very svelte-looking two-seater car, as the 350 was, aluminium bodied, very exotic, with a 3.5 litre 4-cam V12 in it, which Ferrari hadn't even released yet for road car use. And these upstarts really caused Ferrari headaches, and Maserati in a way, as well as other manufacturers in the world. So an immensely important piece of car history here. As I say, the bodywork is hand-laid aluminium, so you've got a ladder frame chassis running along the centre of the car, which is quite a heavy affair because it's got the engine on it, the gearbox, the back suspension, the front suspension is all hanging from this very substantial chassis. Then you've got a sort of subframe work above it, a tertiary framework as it's called, which is quite thin pieces of tubing. And then over the top of that is laid this hand-formed, beautiful hand-formed aluminium bodywork. The same system was used, Touring of Milan patented this system, and the Superleggera, super light system was also used by them when they made the DB4, 5 and 6 Aston Martin. They used the same system until Touring of Milan, unfortunately, at that time, went out of business in the late 1960s. So The fact that this car is so light because it's got the aluminium body, and the fact that it's so well engineered, meant it was a very, very fast car in its time, very fast. So this car has come in from a European customer. It's here for restoration. At first glance, the car looks beautiful, and it is beautiful. It started life in a light blue metallic, azzurro metallizzato, which is going to go back to. So we're going to strip all the paintwork off the car. It has got some localized oxidization under the skin of the paint, and it's also got slight electrolytic corrosion between the aluminium and the steel chassis where they meet. This is dissimilar metals reacting with each other. This unfortunately happens with old cars. It happens with Aston Martins, with alloy-bodied Ferraris, things like that. So we're going to be cutting sections out of this car and welding in new bits of aluminium as needed. And all this will become more apparent as we take the paintwork off the car and look at what's underneath. What I'd like to do is just share some of the more interesting and unique features about this car's interior. So let's take a look. One of the delights of this sort of work for me is coming across cars that are so special as this, because everything is almost done on a one-off basis on extreme early production and low production cars such as this. For example, this beautiful steering wheel, it's the original wheel, was fitted to only a handful of 350 GTs, and I don't think it was actually fitted to anything else. This is just a beautiful piece of Italian art in its own right. These aluminium bezels on the instruments are handmade, and they were only fitted to the first handful of 350 GTs. I actually looked at a later chassis number car than this recently, not too many numbers afterwards, and it didn't have these bezels on, and it never had. So these were put on from new, but obviously Lamborghini realised that they couldn't, it was all just too much cost-wise, so they had to sort of wind things back a bit. Again, this beautiful engine-turned little aluminium panel here. Engine turning was sort of brought into vogue by Ettore Bugatti in the 1920s initially. His Type 35 engines, this rather lovely swirling pattern that's done with a circular wire brush at very regular intervals on the aluminium. Beautiful effect. Bentley used it to great effect on the Continental Ts and things like that, the Azure in the 1990s and the Arnage, the late 90s. This had it from new in 1964, and it's just lovely, and it's all so original. These window switches, which are from an Aston Martin DB5, again, because the car was made by Touring of Milan, they used the same suppliers, because Aston Martin DB5's bodies were engineered by Touring of Milan. So not unusual. These delightful toggle switches, just a beautiful piece of Italian art, really. Even the action of the ashtray is just lovely and really positive. One of the aspects of this car, again, is the fact that it's quite untouched. There's a lot of it that obviously it has been painted and it has been restored previously, but all the lovely little fittings that were literally handmade are still in evidence. Fittings like this beautiful little aluminium plate, this escutcheon plate here on top of the door, all these things are very much still there. So it's going to be a real pleasure to do the restoration work on this car. The first part of the process will be to drive the car, evaluate. Apparently it's in good shape mechanically. She doesn't sound too happy. She's not running on all 12 cylinders, but that's easy enough. We just put a new set of plugs in and she'll come back to life. Just make sure that she's sort of a piece mechanically, which I am told she is, and then we'll start to remove the body fittings very carefully, etc., things like that. The interior was finished in a colour called Senape originally. Of course, Lamborghini, as I say, this is, apart from the original prototype, this is the 9th Lamborghini built and the 5th production car. So it was all terribly early. It was a brave new world. They came up with a colour called Senape for the interior, which is actually mustard in Italian. which is slightly darker than this colour. It's a slightly more vibrant orange colour. And we're going to see if we can do something with the interior, because it's otherwise beautiful, to return it back to that Sinape colour. So we're going to move on to Miuras now and see what's been going on there. Well, here we are back with the yellow Miura, the car from the Black Forest, which we're restoring for a European customer. In my absence, Marcus has stripped the engine down, so here we have the bare cylinder block. It's still got the gearbox and differential in it, but otherwise the pistons, conrods and crankshaft are out of it. It's quite obvious to us that this engine has never been apart. It's everything's original, the gasket materials, just the way everything's put together, you can tell. One of the delights is that the original shell bearings, the Van der Velde shell bearings, are still there. And it's quite interesting because these bearings do follow the practice of both Ferrari and Lamborghini at the time. And I've had comments from people saying, this can't be right. The grooved bearing goes in the bearing cap and the plain bearing goes in the block, so they go like that. Surely the load bearing part, that, should have the more bearing surface area. And actually a couple of people said, we think you've got it wrong, Ian. We think they go the other way around because this does all the work. Actually, this is right. This is factory original. And it's remarkable because so many things in engineering are counterintuitive. They're not the way we expect them to be. And this is a classic example of that. So we've taken this apart. The interior is all out. We've taken the door cards off, those lovely membranes as well, the plastic membranes, and we're now stripping the doors out, the windows, etc. So having looked at where this is up to, I'm now going to show you a different Miura, which is in a slightly different stage of the restoration process. Well, here's one we made earlier. This is a Miura S that we've done a complete ground-up restoration on. It came from the eastern seaboard of the US. It was very rusty indeed. We've had to do quite a lot of new metal remaking for it, etc., etc. This is an original Lamborghini colour, oro metallizzato, gold metallic. We've retrimmed the interior in black leather, as it was in period. The car's come in for a little bit of sort of first service type work. Again, the car's now gone to Europe, so it's nice to see a sort of finished article, really. This is what the yellow Miura will end up looking like when it's done. And the main objective of this is to put some kilometres on the car, some miles on it, bed everything down, tighten everything up, shakedown mileage as we call it. You've got to be careful choosing your weather for obvious reasons. We don't want to ruin all the sort of nice plated items underneath the car with salt, road salt, etc. Ugh, perish the thought. But by the same token, we do have to use the car in the real world, because I'm very much of the belief, as our owners are, that these cars should be driven, not just stood and looked at. We're now going to have a look at one more project, which is part way through, about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through. And this is another different model of Lamborghini. As I say, this is very much a during. It's about 75% of the way through. This is a Lamborghini Jarama, which uses the same V12 as was their sort of staple for some years, but in Espada form, so more sort of road GT than out-and-out Miura or Countach type engine. But very interesting car. It's more of a 2+2 seating than the Espada. It's not as big a car as the Espada, a bit lighter. So they drive really well, Jaramas actually. 350 brake horsepower in the later models, which was a lot for the mid-70s. This particular car, we're getting ready because 2020 is the 50th anniversary of the launch of the Jarama. It originally was brought to the market, first shown at the Geneva show in 1970, if I'm not mistaken. So we're getting this car ready for the concours circuit, the show circuit, and to be enjoyed, hopefully, for later on this year, for 2020. Well, that's the end of another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Hopefully in the next one we'll be getting more sort of hands-on, more up close and personal with some of the work. But for the meantime, hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please share it with your friends. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you soon.